Let's talk about yarn. This video was really hard to make because when it comes to yarn, there's a lot of information out there to go over. So what I decided to do is take a lot of that information and make a separate yarn series and go over that information more in depth instead of quickly scanning over the top of everything and not giving you the information I want to provide for you. This video is part of my Getting Started series. So what I'm going to go over in this video is my recommendation of yarn, talking about yarn, and what I think an absolute beginner crocheter, somebody just getting started, what you need to know to have the best experience possible. In this video, I'm going to go over the different sizes yarn comes in, a couple of the different colors, like terminology you might run into so you understand what that means. I'm going to go over different textures you might encounter and which ones you really want to avoid as an absolute beginner crocheter. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the different shapes you could find yarn in. That way, if somebody refers to yarn in a certain shape, you know what they're talking about and it doesn't go over your head. All right, so when it comes to the different sizes of yarn, I have to back up a little bit because depending on where you live in the world, you could be referring to the same exact size yarn but using a different name to describe it. And you may have encountered this in another YouTube video or in a pattern where you hit the material section, go to yarn, and they're talking about yarn using a term that you don't understand. And you're like, what is that? I know what that is. All right, let's go ahead and begin with a size 0 weight yarn. I know, 0. What? That's the crochet thread. It is super, super itty bitty. Crochet thread is also known as a fingering yarn. It's also known as lace. It can also be referred to as a size 18 WPI or a 2-ply yarn. This yarn is mostly used for doilies or anything that's fine lace, super detailed, like a comforter, a drapey table runner, something very detailed, very delicate. The next material I'm going to talk about is a size 1. The size 1 yarn is also known as a sock yarn, a fingering yarn, a baby weight yarn, or super fine. It's going to make something very, very lightweight, which is why it's known for being a baby weight yarn. It's comfortable for baby. It's great for socks, lightweight, comfortable around your foot. Also known as a 4-ply yarn, or it kind of coincides with that size 0 where it's an 18 WPI size material, very thin, and that is going to make up some very lightweight items such as, like I mentioned, the socks, baby sweaters, baby hats, baby shoes, a lot of stuff for baby. You're going to love this, or anything if you want something very drapey, lightweight to wear yourself, you're going to like a size 1. There's also a lot of room for detail here. The thread is thin enough where any crochet stitch that you're going to make is going to have a ton of detail and be able to show all aspects of that stitch to flatter that stitch. The next yarn is a size 2 weight yarn, otherwise known as a sock yarn, fingering yarn, baby yarn. Great for making baby clothes because it is so lightweight and comfortable for baby. Also known as a 14 WPI or a 5-ply yarn. Next yarn is a size 3 weight yarn, also known as a DK yarn. So this will be a little more familiar to you. A light worsted, lightweight yarn, also known as a 9 WPI. 10-ply yarn. Size 3 weight yarn is great for wearables. So your shawls, your mittens, your scarves, your beanies. It's great for anything wearable because it is lightweight, yet it does provide coverage. The detail of the yarn, the stitches can be very crisp and clear, so you can have fun with different variety of stitches and get definition in the stitch that you are making. So size 3 is great for that. However, it can take a lot of this yarn to make a larger project. So you're going to want to stick with the smaller things, particularly with the size 3 weight, unless you are willing to make a larger project, use more yarn, and have something detailed and beautiful. The size 4 weight yarn is also known as a worsted yarn, an Aran yarn, an Afghan yarn, medium yarn, also known as an 8WPI or a 10 ply yarn. Size 4 weight yarn is the most versatile. You can use it to make virtually anything. A lot of blankets, scarves, beanies, mittens, shawls, pillows. I mean, you name it, you can make it with a size 4 weight yarn. Very, very versatile and easy to use. The size 5 weight yarn is also known as a bulky yarn, chunky yarn, craft yarn, or a rug yarn. Size 5 is also known as a 7 WPI or 12 ply yarn. When you get to the size 5, we're getting a little thicker, so it'll make great scarves, great beanies. You can make a nice sweater with a size 5 weight yarn. Just a little extra bulky. The definition of the stitch starts to get lost with the size 5. You can still see some definition, but you're starting to lose it a little bit. Size 6 weight yarn is known as a super bulky, super chunky roving yarn, or also known as a size 6 WPI or 16 ply yarn. Here we are starting to get great blanket yarn. It's thicker, easier, faster to work up. Great scarves, a shawl. We're starting to get into great yarn to make pillows or any decor around the home. Size 6 weight yarn is going to be perfect for that. It's nice and thick and fast to work up as well. And lastly, it's the size 7 jumbo yarn, also known as a 0 to 4 WPI yarn. It doesn't even have a ply number identified with it, but this is definitely a much, much thicker yarn. You're going to be making projects that are anything that can deal with bulk here. So a cowl, you could make a scarf, you could make a blanket, you could make a pillow, a floor poof. Anything that can take that super bulk is going to work up great and fast. This yarn works up projects super fast. But in the process of it being larger yarn too, there's less of it in a skein, so you're going to go through yarn faster as well. All right, so those are the different size yarn you may encounter and the different terminology they may be referred to as. The next thing we're going to talk about is different colors, terminology you may encounter, and what it means. Talking about colors of yarn is a lot of fun, but there is some terminology that you might want to be aware of when it comes to colors of yarn, so you know what's happening, what's going on when somebody is referring to a yarn or just selecting the yarn that you desire for your project. We're going to start with just a solid yarn. Solid color yarn is just one color. That's it. Easy to color change, to control your color changes. You can pick which colors go together. You choose your choice, you're in control when it comes to a solid color yarn. Next is a variegated yarn. You're going to hear this a lot when it comes to yarn, is a self-variegated yarn, which just means it has multiple colors in the same one skein of yarn. That's all it means. Multiple colors in one skein. This can be ideal when working up projects because the color combinations have already been taken care of for you. You don't have to think of what colors will look good with which colors. It's already there. The transition of colors will happen naturally as you are working up the project, and it can look very beautiful. Next I'm going to talk about is a painted yarn. Painted yarn will also have different colors, but those colors will be very blotchy, like chunks of color in a row. Big chunks of color. And look just more painted, like you came to a canvas and you tapped the yarn with your paintbrush. Color here, color here. There's no rhyme or reason in the order of where the color pops up. Tweed is a beautiful yarn. It's dominantly one color with little bits of other colors intermixed into the yarn itself in periodic places. However, it's not a straight color change. There is that dominant color that's going to be in the yarn itself consistently with just little bits of color mixed in with that dominant color in random locations. Striped yarn is a lot of fun. When it comes to striped yarn, you're going to take multiple strands of yarn, different colors, twist them together and crochet them as one. In these skeins, they've already taken care of that for you by choosing different colored plies of yarn that they will take and twist together to make the size yarn that you are wanting to work with. but then again, the color is already figured out for you. They've already decided what works best, so you don't have to worry about figuring out what colors to use together. An ombre yarn is absolutely beautiful. With ombre, there are multiple colors involved in the skein of yarn. However, there's a transition of the colors, so the colors really flow naturally in their color change, and they don't have that abrupt, oh, now I'm a different color. There is this transition color helping the color fade into another color, and it's very beautiful and a very smooth transition. Last thing I want to talk about is the flex yarn. Flex yarn is like tweed yarn in the sense that there is a dominant color involved in the yarn, the skein, but you're going to have little bits of material popping out of the yarn in multiple places throughout the strand. That other material may be a pop of a secondary color or multiple colors. However, like the tweed yarn, the skein is dominantly one color that will remain consistently throughout the entire project with just little specks, and they call them flecks, little flecks of different color that will just pop up throughout the project in very small amounts. All right, so those are the different colors that you will encounter. Be very common to hear names such as a variegated yarn or an ombre yarn or a solid color yarn. Even the flex or the tweed will come up. All these names will come up. You will see them, you will hear of them, but now you have an idea of what that yarn means and how you would identify it when working with a project, or even when you might be interested in utilizing a certain type of yarn for a project that you want to create. Nowadays, there are so many different types of textures when it comes to yarn that I couldn't possibly show you all of the examples. It's crazy how many different types of yarn are available now for you to play with. But what I can at least do is give you some examples of different textures. That way you have an idea of what to look for, what is going to work best for your particular project, and you can go from there and then just have fun looking down the yarn aisles of your craft store at all of the different textures that are now available. I'm going to start with just talking about a solid, non-textured yarn, and that is a very common yarn to use. Solid, non-texture, best to use with any project that you are going to want to make that has any detail. If you're trying to work with a crochet stitch that you want to see the actual stitch definition, you're going to want a non-textured yarn. And if you're going to want to have any control over what you are seeing in the project, you're going to want a non-textured yarn. It's going to help you to see your stitches, where you're placing your stitches, what's happening. It's just a lot easier to see what's going on with a non-textured yarn. Next, I'm going to show you the velvet. Velvet is super soft. It looks like it would be a non-textured yarn because of the solidness of the fibers. However, the velvet can intermix with each other, combine with each other, and make it a little more difficult for you to see your stitches, see the definition of the stitch you are making. It's not impossible. You still can work with it, but it's a little more challenging because the bulkiness of the velvet can take up space and make it a little more challenging to see where your crochet hook should go. Next, I'm going to talk about the scrubby yarn. Scrubby yarn is becoming more common as we are having a lot of fun creating scrubbies for our kitchen sinks, for our bathrooms, making any spa projects for a friend as a gift. Scrubby yarn is awesome. What you will see though is that there are a lot of fibers that are going to create friction when crocheting. You will be able to see your stitches, but the yarn will grab and grip as you are trying to make your stitch, which can cause a little bit of frustration just because of the friction caused, the pulling, the grabbing, the gripping. It's not a smooth crochet process. So just be aware of that. Fur yarn is beautiful, a lot of fun, can make incredible things, but what's fun about fur yarn is that you can't tell that whatever you made was crocheted because the fur just completely covers up any and all stitches. However, in the process of the fur covering up any and all stitches, it can be very challenging to crochet with a fur yarn because it's hard to see where your crochet hook should go. It's hard to see the stitch. It's hard to see the chain. It's hard to see any definition. Forget about trying to make any kind of design with a fur yarn. The fur itself is going to completely cover up any particular fancy stitch you're trying to make with it. But it will work great with a very standard stitch, making something absolutely beautiful and working up pretty quickly as well. So this fur yarn is going to be very difficult to work with as a new absolute beginner crocheter because you can't see your stitches. You just kind of have to know what you're doing instinctively, have a little more experience. Fuzzy yarn, more textured yarn is absolutely beautiful. Again, it may still have that effect where it can cover up your stitches, make it a little more challenging for you to see where your crochet hook could go. This particular yarn right here isn't as bad, but it's still something to consider as an absolute beginner crocheter if you're trying to learn where I'm putting my crochet hook, what stitch I need to put where, how many yarn overs I need to put over my crochet hook, and how many times I need to pull yarn through loops. You want to be able to see what's going on, and with a textured yarn, beautiful, works up fast, works up stunning, so fun to play with, but it may be harder for you to see what's going on. This Wrap Star from Lion Brand, I don't even know if they have a whole lot of this anymore. This yarn it's not twisted. It literally looks like you have 4 pieces of thread. You're working with 4 pieces of thread and crocheting it together. Your crochet hook ends up getting lost or stuck or losing chains within this particular thread itself. So it can be frustrating and challenging working with so many individual strands at the same time, and just not super fun for an absolute beginner to work with. So if you see this on sale and it's super cheap, I still would not recommend you play with it as an absolute beginner crocheter because it can be very frustrating. The fact that the strands are not twisted together, they're loose individually. And then last textured yarn that I want to share with you is more of a fabric yarn. It's like a rope yarn. Super fun to play with, super fun to crochet with. Not so bad to work with as an absolute beginner crocheter because you're not having to worry about the yarn splitting on you. You're not having to worry about seeing your stitches because it is a non-textured yarn, but it is different to work with. It's thicker, it's heavier, and that might be the part that may get you hung up with it. It's just the weight of this yarn. But I would say that an absolute beginner could potentially have fun with this particular rope yarn. All right, the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to yarn is the different shapes you may see it in. That way, if somebody refers to yarn in a certain way, you know what they're talking about. The most common way you're going to find yarn is in a skein or skein. It's tomato, skein or skein, how you pronounce it. But it'll generally look like this shape right here. Next is a hank. A hank of yarn is usually a twisted yarn that is more flat, rounded, and in this shape. That is known as a hank. The cake is generally a cylinder shape that is all wrapped up in the center. Look like this. Lot of Karen cakes. You may have thought, why is it called a Karen cake? It doesn't look like a cake, food. Well, they're not talking about food cake, what you would eat. They're talking about the shape of the yarn. A Karen cake is a Karen thing of yarn that has been rolled in this shape, a cake. And then also have one right here for you to see. It's just anything that's been rolled into this cylinder shape. A ball of yarn is just a yarn, any yarn that has been rolled into a ball. A cone will be in the shape of this cone. So this is a cone of yarn. And last but not least, a donut. And I know, what's up with the food? You got the cake and the donut. What's going on? So the donut will look like this. It's like in the shape of like a donut, rounded. It can also be bigger like this, these are donut shapes with a hole in the center, and it's rounded and more flat. Right, those are the different names that you may encounter. So if anyone talks about, hey, I need that hank, or can you get me a cake, or can you cake up this yarn, or I need that donut right there. You know what they're talking about. It's the shape the yarn comes in. And this way you'll be more knowledgeable moving forward as you're ordering yarn, buying yarn, or helping somebody acquire yarn, or even if somebody is talking about it in a pattern or a YouTube video. All right, now moment of truth. When it comes to what yarn I would recommend any person that is getting started with crochet to utilize to start with for the best experience possible, I am going to recommend a non-textured yarn that is a size 4 weight, worsted, medium, Aran, 10, 12 ply, or 8 WPI sized yarn. So non-textured, that size, in a lighter color. Don't go variegated right off the bat. Variegated yarn, anything that's color changing, might be distracting for you, and you start to focus on the wrong thing. I want you to focus on crocheting and the stitches and what you're doing. So a solid color yarn that is preferably lighter in color. You can use a cream, you can use a gold, a green, anything that's lighter in color. When you start to get dark, like a dark blue, a black, black's the worst. Even this color might be a little dark. Any darker colors are going to be a little more difficult to see. Darker colored yarn, harder to see stitches. That's why there's a little saying that if somebody made you a crocheted item with black yarn, they love you a lot. Because stitches are really, really difficult to see with a black or really dark colored yarn. So as a brand new Absolute Beginner Crocheter, I would recommend a light colored yarn so you can see what you're doing, non-textured, non-color changing, just solid color yarn, in a size 4 weight worsted medium Aran, 10, 12 ply, or 8 WPI sized yarn. Go ahead and keep this video train going, the Getting Started series. The next thing I'm going to be talking about is scissors, and you'd be surprised at what options there are available to you. All right, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you with the next one. Bye, guys.